Hello everyone, AmyR here with Prairie Paper and Ink, and I have not one but 3 cards for you guys today. So I had this piece of Ranger watercolor paper, which is the same as the Distress watercolor paper. It just comes in 8.5 by 11 pieces. And I am stamping these images onto the smooth side of it, and I'm tracing out the Simon Says Stamp stitched rectangle die that I plan on die cutting to create my little cards here. So I laid the die down, traced it out with a pencil so that I can line it up later on to die cut. And then within that, I'm stamping these images from the Simon Says Some Bunny Special stamp set. So I'm including this video in my little 2017 Easter series, even though all 3 of these cards, none of them are Easter themed, but I'm kind of behind on Easter projects, so I was like, I'm just gonna insert this one in there. So I decided to do 3 because this set has all these cute little bunnies and I honestly couldn't decide. And I was like, you know what, if I do 3 smaller kind of panels, I can create 3 cards, maybe keep them a little more simple. So I created my 3 little scenes, and then I had another scrap, and I'm stamping the last bunny from that set onto there multiple times because I'm going to use that on the inside of the cards. And then to color in all of these images, I decided to do some Distress ink watercoloring. And I just super sped this up because I didn't do anything super special. I just wet the background first with clear water. And then I had smushed the Broken China Distress ink onto my little palette here. And I'm just picking that up with my paintbrush. And rather than do like a smooth wash, I'm like dabbing, like almost pouncing the brush really to kind of create a mottled effect. I was kind of thinking, you know, a cloudy sky, whatever. Plus the fact that this is a little easier. Sometimes my OCD gets to me a little bit when I'm trying to do, you know, a smooth wash. You know, you want everything to be so perfect. But that's the beauty of watercolor, is it doesn't need to be perfect. So I just kind of pounce the color on, and then I use my heat tool to speed up the drawing process so I could go on to the next area, which was the ground. And I did the exact same thing. So I'm just picking up the color after I got the area wet with clean water and pouncing it kind of onto the grassy area. Before I even got to all that, when I was stamping the images, I just used my little Copic multiliner to kind of draw in the grass just to kind of finish off the little image. Really simple, and the Copic multiliner is waterproof, so it works perfectly. So after I did all that and made sure everything was dry, I went in and watercolored the bunnies themselves. For that, I used pumice stone ink. My original intent was to keep the bunnies more white, but I can never leave well enough alone. That's the one thing I struggle with the most, is keeping images near white or very light. I just tend to be very heavy-handed with the color. So I used pumice stone, and while the image was still damp, I went in with another layer of it just to kind of darken areas so it's not just flat. And I kept going on and kind of bouncing around to different areas so I didn't have to consistently keep like drying each layer, because you definitely don't want one area to be wet when you paint right up next to it, and then the color just starts mixing and going around everywhere. So I did, that's the nice thing too about doing multiples like this, is you can do like all the bunnies, you know, all the background at once, all the ground at once, all the bunnies at once, etc., etc. So it kind of cuts down really on how much time it would take to make, say, 3 separate cards. So I just kept going back and forth, and then I never realized that my camera battery died while I was like in the zone painting. So I had set everything aside to dry and had painted all the other bunnies the exact same way. And then I had stamped the envelope and 2 of the little carrots also onto that scrap watercolor paper. Watercolored those. The envelope and the carrots I fussy cut. And then I'm just using my Memento Tuxedo black marker to edge that, to cover that white bit of paper so that these look a little more seamless. Especially with watercolor paper, because it's a little thicker. You notice it a bit more when you fussy cut. But you also have to be really light-handed with the marker, because the watercolor paper wants to just pull the ink out of the marker. So you could end up with a mess. So I'm just very lightly touching it to the edge and then moving on. The other bunnies, I did not fussy cut as much. I just cut around with a border because I'm just going to glue those onto the inside. So once I did those, I'm now going to die cut all these images with that stitched rectangle die. And you can see like my desk is full. I keep telling myself I need to make more space, you know, have my videos a little more professional, don't have such a mess going on. But honestly, by the end of any card, I'm lucky if I have more than like 6 inches square to create in. It's just what happens. So I just kind of shove everything out of the way so I can set my big shot down, do all my die cutting. I tape these dies into place with my micropore tape here just to hold it while I run it through the machine, and then having those pencil lines I did earlier helped to line everything up again. And then while I had the machine out, I also die cut some pattern paper. This is from the Doodlebug Easter Express pack that I've had for a while now and hadn't cut into. So I die cut 3 of the patterns with the largest stitch rectangle die. And then for the sentiments, I decided to use gray cardstock instead of black. I just thought the gray would look a little softer with these cards since there's not really much black going on. Like, they're just bright colors and they're spring themed. So I grabbed a scrap of Simon Says, I think this is slate gray. I'll have it linked in the supplies anyway. So I treated the cardstock with my anti-static powder tool first, and then I'm just stamping sentiments from the set onto it with Simon Says clear embossing ink, and then using detail white embossing powder to coat all these sentiments, heating it with my heat tool. And then I trimmed them first with my paper trimmer, and then for a couple of them I actually used those same stitch dies to trim the edges. Like for this long one, I used that so that each end had some stitching. And then I ran into a small complication here because I wanted to trim this specific sentiment down even more because it was too thick for the image. It was covering up like most of the background. So when I trimmed it, I was using the wire in my trimmer to kind of give me a guide here, which was fine. But right at the very edge along the top, because of the stitch line, it actually cut out a little piece of it, which isn't the end of the world, but it's very obvious. And I did not want to re-stamp and re-emboss and re-die cut the whole thing. So I found a way around it, and I'll get to that in a second. So this other sentiment, same thing, I'd run it through the machine with the stitch rectangle dies just to kind of finish off the edges. And then I'm adhering the little envelope with some multi-medium matte adhesive, and I'm doing the same thing with the little carrots that I had stamped and fussy cut as well. Just little dabs of multi-medium, and then I can adhere those over the images. And then for this long sentiment, I'm going to first adhere the carrot here. And flipped him around, got it adhered, and then I'm adhering the sentiment strip with my ATG adhesive. That's how I adhered all the sentiments. So get that into place, and then I had saved the little strip of cardstock that had that tiny little notch out of it, and you can see here when I adhere this sentiment, there's that little piece missing on the upper right corner, which, I don't know, to me that's like blatantly obvious. It was driving me nuts. So I just trimmed off that tiny little piece that I accidentally ripped off with my scissors. And then I used a dab of multi-medium matte adhesive and then my tweezers to hold that cardstock, and then I just pressed it into place. So unless you look really closely, you can't notice it. Thankfully, that stitch line kind of helps conceal it a little bit. So that saved me from having to re-stamp, emboss, die cut, etc., etc. So once I was done fiddling with all that, I'm going to adhere all of these to the pattern paper backgrounds with some foam tape. So just getting them centered up onto all of these backgrounds. And then I had remaining pieces left over from all of these pattern papers after die cutting them. So of course I trimmed those down, and I'm going to use those on the inside of all the cards just to keep things kind of streamlined and simple. And I always like to line up everything on my grid mat. It kind of helps me visualize and get things lined up as I'm adhering everything. So once I've got that, I'm going to go on to my card bases, which is this heavyweight white cardstock. And I cut one in half so that it'll be a top folding A2 size card the long way. Portrait, landscape. This will be landscape. I always have to remind myself which is which. So it'll be one top folding landscape card, 2 top folding portrait cards, all A2 sized. So I scored all of them at the 2 portrait ones at 5.5, the landscape one at 4 1/4 with my Teflon bone folder, and I just used the groove in my paper cutter. And then I press that crease down really well with a Teflon bone folder. This is a must-have tool. Trust me, you haven't lived when it comes to card making unless you have a Teflon bone folder. It really just, it glides like butter. I love it. Had mine for a few years now, and I don't know how I survived without it. So got all my card bases, adhered down all the panels, and then I finally adhered the scraps basically of the same pattern paper on the inside. And then just adhered that other bunny onto the inside, and that finished off these cards. I decided not to stamp any sentiments on the inside, anything like that. Just kept them a little more simple. So once those were done, I wanted to add some more detail to the bunnies, especially the laying down one. The eyes didn't stamp perfectly. So I'm using my little Pilot envelope addressing pen that I am really loving lately. And I just dab it on to enhance the eyes, and it's so black, and it's not quite fully glossy, but it's just obvious in my mind. It stands out a little bit. So I just dab that onto their eyes to make them stand out, and then added just a little bit of sparkle with my Spectra Noir clear sparkle pen, and I was scribbling it off in between just in case, because it can reactivate distress inks, because distress inks are reactivated by like water and moisture. So I would just scribbled on the sparkle, like onto their little noses and the flowers, the insides of their ears, etc., just for that little extra something. And I'm going to turn on the flashlight on my phone so you guys can actually see the sparkle, because just looking at it straight on, you don't really see it. But then when the light hits it, you can see the sparkle. So that's why I love these sparkle pens so much, because it's subtle and yet it's there. So it just gave it that little extra something, and that completely finished off all of these cards. So as always, I'll have links below the video to my blog post with links to all the supplies used. So if you're interested in any of that, check out the description box below the video and head on over to my blog for picture links and just a little bit easier way to navigate. Thank you all so much for watching, subscribing, thumbs upping, and commenting on my videos. I really appreciate the support, and I will see you all very soon in another video. Bye.